Hello, we're just going to wait 1 second while everybody gets into place on this end, on that end, on your end. Make sure everybody's in place. I appreciate it. All right, great. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the Managing Director at Cultivated, and thank you for joining us for this timely conversation on what may be one of the most consequential regulatory shifts in the cannabis industry that we've seen in decades. With the President of the United States in December announcing a push to reschedule cannabis from 1 to Schedule 3, there's been no shortage of headlines, speculation, and dare I say, optimism, but far less clarity on what this actually means in practice day to day. Today's discussion is designed to move past the hype. We're going to focus on what changes immediately and what doesn't, and how banks, operators, and advisors, and even you, should realistically prepare for what comes next. This webinar brings together three perspectives that rarely sit at the same table, which is nice to have them all here today: compliance and banking, legal strategy, and really operator, let's call it reality, particularly payments and financial infrastructure. So today, I'm pleased to be joined by Tony Repanich, the CEO of Shield Compliance. Shield Compliance is, first of all, a great partner of ours here at Cultivated, but is a purpose-built cannabis banking compliance platform for financial institutions. They work with those financial institutions and banks that bank the cannabis industry, and Tony in particular is a 25-year plus banker, so his perspective on the intersection of banks and cannabis really is unmatched. Then Scott Moskal also is a partner at Blank Rome. Scott is a partner in the corporate and cannabis practices at Blank Rome, and he's based in Boston. And since 2013, he's established himself as a leading cannabis industry attorney, building a nationwide client base that includes investors, lenders, cultivation, dispensary operators, investment funds, and family offices. His practice spans the full spectrum, excuse the cannabis pun, of legal services in this rapidly evolving sector, of course, including capital raisers, mergers, acquisitions, investment vehicle structuring, regulatory compliance, and general business counsel, all which may be impacted by rescheduling. So we'll talk to Scott as well. And joining Scott and Tony is Brian Barish, the VP of External Affairs at Dutchie, where he serves as the policy lead, and also, importantly for this conversation, serves on the executive board of the U.S. Cannabis Roundtable, and he co-leads the Coalition for Cannabis Scheduling Reform. And of course, Dutchie is the largest cannabis technology company in the sector, serving thousands of cannabis retailers with point-of-sale payments and an array of other critical services. And our goal today is quite simple: to translate a long-awaited policy shift into operational reality for banks, for cannabis businesses, and for the broader financial services ecosystem. So that is certainly enough for me. Let's bring on Scott, Brian, and Tony. Scott, Brian, and Tony, thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.
To see you.
Good to see you. And we intended to do this in December, but we instead are doing it in mid-January due to some technical issues. But it doesn't seem to me a ton has changed between when we intended to do this and now. Maybe that'll be part of the conversation. But again, thank you for being available in December, and thank you for joining us here in January. Tony, I want to start with you. And we've had some of these conversations even since the announcement in the Oval Office. But from a bank's perspective, from a banker's perspective, what actually changes on day one of Schedule 3, assuming that that does happen? And what compliance obligations stay exactly the same despite the headlines?
Nothing changes. Thanks. Next question.
No,
Unfortunately, it won't have a meaningful change on the obligations that banks have to perform under the Bank Secrecy Act. And specifically, the 2014 guidance from Treasury about how to handle marijuana-related businesses. And so I think what we'll be looking for is nuanced changes, but that's really going to have to come from the administration after day one of rescheduling, and hopefully in maybe a new version of the FinCEN guidance or other administrative directives that tell banks that they might be able to do things differently. Yeah. Keep in mind, we're still going to be in a situation where the vast majority of the U.S. cannabis industry will still be in conflict with federal law. Last I checked, there's no recreational drugs on Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. And most of the market that we all serve is the is a recreational adult use market. And so that conflict will still exist, and those reporting requirements will still be in place. In addition, there's a varying number of estimates about the size of the illicit market in the US versus the state legal market. And financial institutions are still obligated to make sure that the businesses that they're providing services to and the money that they're moving is from legal activities. And so the obligation will remain high. What we're hoping to see is that we'll get some relief from FinCEN around these limited SARs, which would take some of the burden off of financial institutions.
Okay.
So
that's from, go ahead.
Jay, if I could jump in there, I think
Sure.
Tony is absolutely right on the obligations of financial institutions, but I think there's a broader piece of this that we need to understand about what this means for financial institutions, because I think people are probably underappreciating how this could change the operating environment for cannabis businesses. Now, as Tony works with many of them, there are hundreds of banks and financial services companies already servicing the industry, right? There's this, I think, falsehood that it is illegal to service the industry. It's not. And many do compliantly with FinCEN guidance right now. Mm-hmm. It's a risk-based decision that some larger institutions are making to not serve the industry. So our hope and our expectation is that this will, what I'd say like a full click towards a more legalized, rationalized cannabis policy will get more folks interested. There's certainly going to be a lot of opportunity if they do get involved. There's even been reporting that the president wants to see them get involved and may not be happy if they don't. That could push things. And then, while I think you're right, Tony, I don't know that there's other recreational substances that are in Schedule 3 and fit this exactly. There are plenty of Schedule 3 drugs that are offered outside of traditional pharmacies, right? So we see lots of examples of what a separate regulation environment could look like that are serviced by credit cards and banks, et cetera. So we think Schedule 3 does provide a lot of opportunity to have this conversation.
And pause on that word credit card. We're going to get there. Scott, go ahead. I want to talk to you about what it means for operators in particular and being in conflict, as sort of Tony said, potentially.
No, but going back here, what I was going to say is, to be compliant and under Schedule 3, the FDA has to approve, as a drug or a food additive, and that's a long process. So even once Schedule 3, even once rescheduling occurs, it's not as if all the cannabis sold out of medical dispensaries is suddenly federally legal. And I think that's the conundrum that probably a lot of banks are trying to figure out, right? It's not necessarily going to change the landscape of their risk tolerance at the end of the day. They have to make a decision, how does it affect their reputation, the entire risk analysis that they have to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Tony, can I come back to you on that front? And Brian mentioned there are several hundred banks that bank cannabis. I think you've said maybe it's 200 to 300 that do it sort of robustly. I don't know what the right word is to say that, but do we expect more? That's almost a sort of do we expect this influx? Brian didn't say influx, but maybe larger banks be more accepting of the risk, or maybe more banks looking at sort of banking cannabis, or should we expect 6 or 12 months in to be status quo, maybe with some tweaks here and there? Do we expect some influx of cannabis banks sort of lining up to service the industry?
I think there will be some boards that make the decision that because the potential penalties are less, the risk seems less risky. As Brian mentioned, it's a risk-based decision, that there will be some that step in. Will there be a large number? I don't expect so, for a few reasons. One is the established players in the market today are now operating at scale. So someone who decides to get in now has to evaluate whether they can get to scale in a meaningful way and still have all the same compliance obligations, because we don't see those changing out of the gate. And so I think some of these financial institutions will sit on the sidelines and kind of wait to see what happens. Now, if we get something like uplisting or other things that might impact the capital market side, that might encourage some financial institutions to get in, but in a very select way. So I'm not expecting a big influx of additional financial services providers. There may be one or two that are on the fence now, and this would help get them over the line.
I mean, isn't the issue, can they make money off of providing these services to cannabis companies? And right now, with price compression amongst all our various bank clients or connections, the market has, I mean, at one point when this cannabis banking first started, where it was like $5,000 per bank account, and we're talking like 2017 or 18. But now it's somewhere between, zero as a loss leader to maybe $500, a month at best, from what I've seen. I know there's some outliers as well, but just from deposits, you're not going to make a lot of money. And in fact, you may not make enough money to staff up, like you were talking about, Tony, to comply with all your FinCEN obligations.
And we might have a confluence of events here that cause some people to get in or to change the products and services they're offering. One is still this sort of conundrum with intoxicating hemp, and whether that begins to fall into these state-based programs instead of how they're managed today. And there's some financial institutions that have exposure to just that side of the equation, and that might change their appetite overall. And then with the improvements in cash flow expected from 280E relief, I would expect that folks that maybe previously hadn't lent to the industry now have a different view on things, given the improvement in cash flow. Even with those compressed margins that Scott mentioned, for some of these folks, this is a meaningful improvement in their overall cash position.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think we tend to talk about banks when we talk about financial services, but it's a much broader industry than that. So even if we feel that there may be some saturation on the banking side, there's lending, insurance, payments, supporting mergers, bankruptcy, and then even further afield from financial services. It's not the topic of this webinar, but there's texting companies and advertising companies and all other types of supporting services that we rely on that we don't always have access to. And we would expect a sort of broad influx, maybe not a huge influx, but a broad influx across different types of services that cannabis industry does need.
Yeah, Brian, can I actually drill down on that? One is certainly 280E and what that means for sort of people operating, Dutchy customers operating in the realm and their ability to sort of write off normal business expenses. But the other is cannabis payments, which does fall into sort of probably this category of banking and sort of financial services. Have you guys done an estimate of what that would mean for an average? How many of the transactions currently happening now with something other than credit cards might actually shift over to credit cards? That's sort of part A, but also part B, how much more would they be spending if it was credit cards?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's pretty clear that cashless payments have a significant increase in basket size and have a real bottom line revenue impact. That's for all cashless payments. I think we generally see that cashless payments that are debt-based rather than asset-based are generally even higher. So, even above and beyond things like bank payments that Dutchy offers, you would expect when you could buy with debt, you'd see maybe even higher margins. But I think all of it makes a difference. You'll also just see a much higher, what we call share of wallet. So you'll see a lot more of those cash transactions turning into credit transactions once they're turned on, because consumers are used to it. Now, I do think we may have lower rates of credit card usage than other industries because consumers have gotten so used to using some of these alternate methods. And, you see traditional industries already moving towards some of those maybe higher margin payment methods as well. So we'll see an interesting mix, but there's no question credit cards will greatly increase cashless payments and basket sizes.
Yeah. And Scott, I don't want you to practice law on this webinar, God forbid. But how should, I guess this is more sort of broader and sort of 30,000 foot level, but how should cannabis companies be thinking about either restructuring their entities or contracts or financing arrangements before rescheduling is finalized at some point down the horizon? Or should they be status quo until this thing happens on time horizon ?
No, I think, listen, we don't know when rescheduling will occur, and we don't know once it occurs what type of legal challenges there will be and how long that will take to go through the system. But, there are certain things. Like I was just having a call just now. And once 280E goes away, now we don't think it's going to be retroactive. Maybe if it occurs in 2026, it'll be retroactive to January 1st. But we were talking about like a redemption of shareholders and whether waiting until the rescheduling occurs, does that provide any tax relief for the company? So that's just one example. Another example, same conversation, they have a bunch of state trademarks. There's a lot of thought that you can now get, once rescheduling occurs, a federal trademark. And so at that point, there's tons of cannabis companies all using similar names, like everything's Canna Green or something. And so what we're telling folks is, okay, you don't need to deal with it right now, but you need to start thinking about it so your applications are ready to go. Because in many ways, it could be a race to the courthouse or a race to the U.S. Patent Office, Trademark Office. And you don't want to be second or third, because then, all the branded merchandise you've been selling, you can't sell it any longer.
Right.
And that's, just things of that nature. So you do have to start thinking about what changes might be available to you. But frankly, there's a lot of unknown at this point.
Yeah.
There was a lot of discussion last year about ESOPs, and I know you've helped some companies along that path. Does this change that equation about the value of those arrangements?
So in an ESOP, just for folks know, it's an employee stock option plan. And one of the biggest benefits is you don't pay any income tax, federal or state. So this has a lot of importance for cannabis companies because they're paying an oversized tax burden because of 280E. Although, are they? Because in the last couple of years, many of them are taking the position that 280E is unconstitutional, et cetera, et cetera. They're getting legal opinions, and thus they are either not paying their 280E component or they're paying it under protest. But regardless, even if you're not paying 280E, you're paying income tax. So ESOPs still have a lot of importance in the industry. The other importance in the industry is an ESOP is a way to cash out the initial founders or investors. And ESOPs happen, there's hundreds of ESOPs in non-cannabis world, every year. Right now, even with rescheduling, we don't necessarily know there'll be extra cash or liquidity for folks to be bought out, whether through obtaining bank debt or M&A activity. So ESOPs still provide a method for cashing out in an economy where we don't have as much liquidity. So I do think there's still a reason or importance of ESOPs in this industry. I think, though, that a lot of folks who are just using it as a hedge against having to pay 280E may have second thoughts because of the time and expense.
Brian, if I may, because obviously 280 is an important part of this conversation and what it means for cash flow, what it means for banks assessing risk, all of those things. And you have your ear to the ground and often your feet on the ground in Washington, D.C. as well. And how much of that conversation about 280E is happening in D.C.? Because it seems to me there's also folks in Congress who say, even if through schedule we're going to pass a bill that means 280 is still in its place. Like, what is the conversation in DC? And did we talk about it more in the past 5 minutes than people talk about it in DC in a year?
I mean, probably, but that's probably true of many things with cannabis. Although, I think it's incredible to think about the fact that it's become such a hot topic in DC while so much is going on. I think it's easy to forget 10 years ago, you'd be laughed out of the room for suggesting you wanted to have a serious policy discussion about cannabis. So we've come pretty far in a short amount of time. And I think even compared to 2 years ago, I'd say Congress has a much more sophisticated understanding on average of the issues going on, whether it's around hemp and how the hemp loophole works. I mean, it used to be like, wait, I don't understand. Aren't you guys all cannabis? And now they're much more sophisticated and understand that distinction. I'd say the same on some of these banking issues and 280E issues. So certainly the IQ is higher there in terms of these conversations. And I do think, there's probably not a serious effort at this point to repeal 280E. I think we are going to be cautious about any effort there. But look, there's a reality that the Democrats don't support it. The president's made it clear that he wants to move in this direction. We've seen what the appetite is for the president's party moving against him. I just think it's pretty unrealistic to imagine that happens. And I know there's also some doubt about how exactly 280E interacts with reschedule. I just want to be super clear. You can read the law yourself. It states in plain language, it only applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So by definition, just to be totally clear, by definition, if it's Schedule 3, 280E cannot apply unless Congress actually went in and changed the law.
Agreed. But be careful, right? Because 280E may go away, but then Congress could enact a federal excise tax of some sort.
Congress can enact anything they want, right? 280E is just a law. They could change the law.
But remember when Schumer proposed his MORE Act or whatever it was called, part of it, 280E was going to go away, but he was going to place some type of excise tax, which would have approximated, at least for the larger MSOs, the amount of tax revenue they would have lost from 280E disappearing. So be careful what you wish for at times.
I will say there's no question there will be a very robust conversation about the contours of legalization and taxation when it happens. That being said, I think my guess is the industry would be happy to have that conversation if it came along with full federal legalization.
Sure. But I think we are naive to think that 280 will go away and there'll be no thought about how do we replace that tax money. It may not be the same burden, but look at tobacco, and alcohol, the amount of sin tax that's placed on that or excise tax. I think
this is the part of the program where there's some shameless self-promotion. We actually have U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand speaking at an event January 29th in New York City. Brian, you're actually Dutchie's a sponsor, and Tony, you're going to be on a panel there. So that's the shameless self-promotion. You can find it at thehighrise.nyc for more information. But it actually, a lot of this conversation, I think, begs the question about timing. As we mentioned at the top, we had a webinar, scheduled 3 days after the announcement. We thought that was great. People would be really amped up because January we're going to hit the ground running. We're mid-January, nobody's run anywhere. We did have a prediction show last week. There were predictions all over the map about when rescheduling might happen, what the federal timeline might be. I guess we could put it in quadrants, but Scott, do you have a best guess or at least what a time horizon might look like? And then we'll go around the horn on that question.
I would predict that the rescheduling itself would occur probably the next 3 to 6 months, close to 6 months, but there'll be court challenges. And how long those court challenges will take, I don't think any of us know. We do know the anti-cannabis groups have hired Bill Barr, former Attorney General, under Trump's first administration to lead that charge. A lot will depend if they want to appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court and how quickly that takes. I think that the full effect might not happen until 2027, just given the legal challenges we all expect.
So hang on is that
but Tony and Brian may be much more optimistic than I am. So
Tony, let's go to you.
I'm kind of on that same 6 month horizon before we would see rescheduling, and I think if we see it sooner than then, it probably means they deviated from more of the administrative procedures and just makes the legal challenges that much more challenging. So I think summer at the earliest before we'd actually see rescheduling actually occur.
Yeah. Brian?
So I'm a little more bullish here. I'd say soon. I think it's soon. I think the intent is for it to be soon. I think we saw the president say weeks back in, August, and then the announcement on the executive order took a few months. I think they intend for it to be soon. I think it could, just the bells and whistles could take them a little bit, but I think their intent is soon. I expect them to follow through on that. I got to say, I'm less worried about the challenges than my compatriots here. I think if you look at the way the process works, under the law, the Justice Department clearly has the power to do this unilaterally. There is a process they can follow, but it's not required. And there's been several reschedulings where it hasn't been followed that way. So given the president's position on this, we would fully expect the Justice Department to just follow through when they're ready. I don't expect we're going to go back to an administrative law process. There is, of course, the possibility of a challenge, but just so we're clear on the sort of technical piece here, once it goes into the Federal Register, my understanding is it then becomes law. So unless a judge were to block it from taking effect, and that sort of the burden would be on the challengers there, it would actually go into effect. And as soon as Schedule 3 goes into effect, 280E would go away. Now, there could still be those challenges. They could work their way through the court, but without an injunction, 280E would go away immediately, right? I mean,
but I expect that motion for injunctive relief has already been written, right? And what they're going to say is we're prejudiced. It can't go into effect because once it goes into effect, the genie's out of the bottle, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And so I'm not as sanguine as you are that there won't be a stay. But, I hope there isn't. I hope next week it goes into effect and no one challenges it. I just want to make that clear.
For sure. I think different people will handicap that differently. I think you can look at the history here around DEA challenges. You could also look at whether these courts have been deferential to the president and make an optimistic case. But I think there's also some, to your point, some reason to think the opponents will have a solid argument as well.
And actually, the Scott and Brian back and forth on this, Tony, leads me to you, because what I know about bankers, everything I know about bankers, I learned from Tony Rapanich, is that stability, clear direction is super important to them, both from like the people that make deposits with them, but also about an industry overall. Whether you believe Brian's timeline or Scott's, or about what might happen after rescheduling happens, it seems to me that it won't be clear if I am either a bank currently serving cannabis or one that might jump in, or even sort of a credit card processor, right? If there's any sort of question marks around the industry and what might happen, like, does that delay either any changes or any easing of what it is like to sort of be a cannabis bank?
Sure. I think, well, you are correct. We as bankers like predictability and stability, and we're just kind of boring folks. So that's just how we operate. And, put payments aside for a second. I think what we're really looking for is, yes, the DOJ goes through with this. It gets published in the Federal Register, does or doesn't get challenged, however that goes. Really, what is the response from the other administrative agencies? What does the FDA say? What does Treasury say? Will SBA come out with some opinion on their guarantee programs? There's lots of opportunities now, including for like the IRS, to clarify some of the things on 280E and when that timeline takes effect. And so I think we're really going to be looking for certainty based on the administrative answers that we get from other agencies outside of the DOJ and the DEA, because that will impact some of the market dynamics. On the payment side, let's say the big brands decide that they are willing to move forward because of the rescheduling, and there are other products that sort of fall into this category and are supported with those payments today. In high-risk payment situations, however, those card brands have special programs for approval of the sponsor bank, merchant approval, coding of those transactions. And so there's an administrative period that could also happen on the payment side that won't necessarily allow for just an overnight flip of the switch to say that Visa and MasterCard are now available. That's assuming that this is enough movement in the market to get Visa and MasterCard to come to the table. But even if they do come to the table, they've got they operate like their own little mini governments, and they'll want to implement those procedures on their end.
So I actually have a question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Jay. But Brian, I understand that right now, if MasterCard and Visa wanted to provide credit services to the industry, they could. They just choose not to. Right?
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. I think we've had conversations. I don't think there's a question they'd like to. They're just, as you both said, financial institutions make risk decisions, and they haven't chosen to get involved yet. We're talking to them regularly. We'd love to see them get involved, and we're hopeful this is the thing that gets them across the finish line. I think Tony's right. It'll take some time, but they also have some models they've built in Canada that could probably be applied pretty quickly.
Oh, good point.
And one proof point, by the way, I think a lot of people don't know this. We operate a completely compliant pay by bank solution, we work with Tony on this actually. It runs through the Federal Reserve. It is supported by sponsor banks, goes through all the appropriate NACHA regulations. I mean, there are other payment methods that have decided to participate in this industry in a completely legal way. So it's clearly legal. It's just a question of when they decide to make that risk assessment.
So it's all just business risk assessment, business decisions, can I make enough money, and does that outweigh the cost of compliance? Is that basically, at the end of the day, their calculus decision?
Yeah, roughly.
I'm just curious.
Or is it that plus reputation? Reputation, right? Yeah. Tony, go ahead.
I think they are very conservative when it comes to this, and they just don't. They could definitely get into it and manage the risk in the same way that financial institutions that are serving the industry today are doing that. And in fact, many of the banks that already work with those card brands would be happy to sponsor those transactions and deploy those requirements under the FinCEN guidance. It's just a risk decision for those brands. It always cracks me up when people say, oh, they're accepting Visa and MasterCard, they're breaking the law. No, you're not breaking the law. You're just breaking your contract with Visa and MasterCard. Yeah. Visa and MasterCard are not the law, but they like to act.
They are outside the law. No, they're their own law. They are the law, just not the law.
Their contracts have penalties that feel like law enforcement.
Well, I'll say this: we'd say, why don't you get in? The water's fine. Many of us are making it work, and there's a lot of opportunity in cannabis. So we're hoping they see that.
Well, I appreciate all of your time today, and we'll come back whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. We'll do the same panel on day one of rescheduling, or maybe a fast follow, and we'll do it for real. The fast follow within a couple of days announcement to see what it has changed, will change, might change. I appreciate it. Actually, Scott, I got an idea for you about almost IP and the age of rescheduling. I'm going to call you back about that and secure trademarks on the federal level.
You got some names that Cultivated.
Yeah, got a whole lineup here. Got a whole lineup. Well, Scott, Brian, Tony, thanks so much for your
regular,
time.
Jay.
What's that?
Sorry. No, I was just saying, get your merchandise all ready. Get it out for sale. Oh,
although Brian actually has one of these hats.
Yeah, it's on the other side of the room.
Brian has one of the 5 hats we made. So Scott, Brian, Tony, I appreciate your time today. We'll connect with everybody soon, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as we wrap up, I've been taking notes. I think one of the things should be clear. Rescheduling may be an historic milestone, but it's not a flip the switch moment. We've heard that normalization will come in phases, partly shaped by compliance expectations and legal interpretation, how banks behave and their risk decisions that they make moving forward. And for operators, the takeaway really isn't to wait, it's to prepare, whether that's understanding cash flow changes from 280E, thinking ahead on payment strategy, or getting legal and your structural ducks in a row, which is always a good idea. And for banks and service providers, predictability, like that seems to be the thing that will help them jump in and stay in to help bank cannabis businesses. I want to thank Tony, Scott, and Brian for bringing real substance and a lot of candor to this conversation. And I want to thank every one of you who joined us here today. And I also want to reassure you, this won't be the last time we revisit this topic as the regulatory picture evolves and becomes clearer or more muddied, I guess. Cultivated and Shield Compliance will continue to bring you, let's call it practical, operator-focused insight on what's changing and why it matters to you and your business. So thank you again for watching. Make sure to check out all that we do at cultivated.news, and we will see you next time.